A unit that was supposed to calibrate the perfect workout instead recalibrates women's minds. This is for entertainment purposes only. This short story is only for people over the age of 18.
Bill's favorite tie was a muted shade of mustard that most people found offensive, but he wore it with a quiet, stubborn pride. He spent his mornings meticulously polishing his shoes with a horsehair brush, ensuring the creases were sharp and the leather mirrored the fluorescent lights of his hallway. He was the kind of man who noticed when a filing cabinet was off balance by a fraction of an inch and spent his lunch hours reading manuals on early 20th century industrial design. To the rest of the world, Bill was a ghost in a beige cardigan, a man so unremarkable that people often forgot he was in the room while he was still speaking.
You're overthinking the alignment again, Bill,
Wendy said, leaning over his shoulder. She was the lead trainer at Zenith Elite, a gym, and the latest piece of equipment looked more like a spaceship than anything else with all its brushed steel and pulsating LED strips. Bill didn't look up from a clipboard.
Precision is the only thing that separates a functional system from a chaotic one, Wendy.
Bill stated.
This unit is to calibrate the perfect workout. Thus, if its calibration is off by even a millimeter, the output is compromised.
Wendy laughed, a warm, genuine sound that echoed through the gym's open floor plan. She patted his shoulder, her hand nearly covering the entire width of his scapula.
You're a treasure, Bill. Most of us just want to lift weights, but you're the only one who actually cares how the machines work. We'd be lost without our resident technician,
Wendy said with joy in her voice. He offered a small, thin smile, his eyes tracking a group of women across the gym. They were the club's top tier, the Apex Six, women whose dedication to the regimen was legendary, and of whom Wendy is part of. They were currently mid-circuit, their movements synchronized and powerful, their breathing a rhythmic, heavy drone that filled the space. They were the gold standard of human optimization, sculpted into living monuments of athletic achievement.
Just a quick diagnostic on the visual feedback loop. Wendy, could you step into the calibration booth for a moment?
Bill's voice was as soft as his cardigan, yet there was a new, focused edge to it. Wendy didn't hesitate. She trusted Bill with the machinery of the gym as she trusted a clockmaker with a timepiece. She stepped into the sleek, mirrored pod, the door sliding shut with a pressurized hiss that cut off the ambient noise of the weight room. The lights dimmed, and then they flared, not with a flash, but with a slow, undulating pulse of iridescent geometric patterns. The shapes weren't random, they were fractal, shifting and folding into one another in a way that bypassed the conscious mind and spoke directly to the subconscious. Wendy felt a sudden, strange lightness in her chest, as if the gravity of her own ambitions and will were being slowly drained away. The patterns didn't just move, they breathed, expanding and contracting in a rhythm that synchronized perfectly with her heartbeat. As the program accelerated, the colors began to swirl in a hypnotic vortex, erasing the boundaries of the booth and the world outside. Wendy tried to remember why she was standing there, but the thoughts slipped through her mind like water. The iridescent geometry became her entire reality, a shimmering language of obedience that rewritten her priorities in a single, sweeping stroke. The fierce, disciplined drive that had made her the lead trainer was still there, but it was being redirected, pivoted away from herself and toward a new, singular point of focus.
Deep breaths, Wendy.
Bill's voice echoed through the speakers, sounding suddenly monumental, filling every corner of her consciousness.
Let the patterns settle. Let the noise fade. There is only the rhythm, and the rhythm is my voice.
Wendy's eyes remained wide, locked onto the swirling colors, but the fire of independence had vanished, replaced by a blank, blissful serenity. Her muscles, usually coiled for action, went slack for a heartbeat before tightening into a new, reflexive readiness. When the door finally slid open, Wendy didn't walk out. She stepped out with a measured, robotic grace, her expression an empty canvas of devotion. She didn't look at the gym or the other trainers. Her gaze locked onto Bill, and she immediately sank to her knees. The impact of her muscular frame hitting the polished floor sounded like a heavy weight being dropped, but her face remained serene, a small, vacant smile playing on her lips as she bowed her head in total surrender.
Now, Wendy,
Bill whispered, his voice barely a breath against the silence of the gym.
The Apex Six are too fragmented. They are islands of strength, but they lack a unifying purpose. They need a bridge.
Wendy didn't speak. She simply leaned her forehead against the cool polish of the floor, her breathing heavy and synchronized. She was no longer just a trainer. She had become a living conduit, a biological extension of Bill's intent. He placed a hand on the crown of her head, and the touch seemed to trigger a dormant circuit within her. With a fluid, mechanical grace, she rose. Her movements were devoid of hesitation, her expression a mask of blissful vacancy, but her eyes held a predatory focus. She didn't need to be told where to go. She turned toward the remaining 5 members of the Apex 6, who were still finishing their final set of squats, their massive thighs trembling under the weight of the iron. Wendy approached them not with a word, but with a gesture. She signaled for them to follow her toward the calibration booth, her voice shifting into a melodic, commanding drone that bypassed their skepticism. To the other women, Wendy was the ultimate authority on optimization, and if she suggested a new visual diagnostic, they obeyed without question. One by one, the powerhouses of Zenith Elite stepped into the iridescent glow. The booth became a revolving door of submission. Each woman entered as a titan of independent will and exited as a sculpted monument to Bill's design, their minds scrubbed clean and replaced with a singular, burning desire to please the man in the beige cardigan. The transformation was not merely mental, it was an amplification. Under the influence of the patterns, their bodies seemed to swell, the vascularity in their arms popping with an unnatural, hypnotic intensity. Their muscles didn't just grow, they tightened and hardened, straining against the neon fabric of their gear until the seams groaned. They were no longer athletes, they were biological masterpieces of obedience. As the final woman stepped out, the 6 of them formed a perfect, radial perimeter around Bill, their massive frames bowing in unison. The sound of 12 knees hitting the floor simultaneously echoed through the gym like a thunderclap. Bill stepped back, admiring the symmetry. He felt a surge of quiet triumph, the kind of satisfaction he usually reserved for a perfectly aligned filing system. He didn't need to shout to be heard. The silence of their submission was more deafening than any command. He began to walk, his mustard-colored tie swaying gently, and the 6 women followed him, not by walking, but by gliding on their knees, their heads bowed in absolute reverence. They were his now, not just servants, but living trophies of his technical precision.
The world is far too loud, isn't it?
Bill murmured later that morning, his voice carrying a lightness he had never dared use in public. After some naked fun, he had led his procession out of the sterile sanctuary of Zenith Elite and into the unfiltered chaos of the city sidewalk. The transition was jarring. The concrete was grit and grime, a stark contrast to the polished marble of the gym. Yet, as he walked, he felt an intoxicating sense of spatial dominance. The 6 women, these towering monuments of hypermuscular grace, didn't just follow him, they anchored him. They moved in a synchronized, low-slung glide, their massive thighs brushing together, mammoth biceps swinging gently, and firm abs rippling with each step. But their eyes were locked with a downward gaze on the heels of his sensible loafers, unworthy of looking up. As they navigated the bustling street, the city seemed to warp around them. Passers-by stopped and stared, captivated by the sight of 6 hyper-sculpted powerhouses in neon gear, women who looked capable of lifting cars, yet were reduced to a state of reflexive, blissful devotion. High above them, a massive digital billboard flickered, catching Bill's eye. It wasn't showing an advertisement. It was broadcasting the iridescent, swirling geometric patterns from a calibration booth, pulsing in time with the silent rhythm that now governed the women's minds. Bill quickly looked away. The city was becoming his gallery, and these women were the first of his primary exhibits. But as the days bled into a singular, hazy cycle of luxury and labor, the nature of their obedience shifted. The Apex 6 had realized, in the silent, shared consciousness of their reprogramming, that Bill was a man of meticulous appetite. They began to compete, not for status or strength, but for the privilege of his attention. They transformed his home into a temple of sensory indulgence, ensuring that every single waking moment of his existence was saturated with their presence. Their devotion became an all-consuming tide. They sought to occupy every second of his time, filling his hours with an intensity of physical intimacy that left him breathless and drained. They coordinated their efforts with the same precision they used for their workouts. While one woman massaged his feet with boulder-like shoulders that trembled with effort, another would be feeding him grapes, and 2 others would be draped, naked, across him like living velvet, their muscular frames providing a heat that rivaled a furnace. They kept him in a state of perpetual, blissful exhaustion, a strategic saturation of pleasure designed to ensure he never felt the need to look beyond their circle to the rest of the enslaved, but still functioning city. Their goal was simple: to keep him so thoroughly immersed in the singular, overwhelming experience of their bodies that the idea of expanding his empire became an afterthought. Bill found himself trapped in a golden cage of his own making. He would wake to the sight of Wendy, her massive arm draped across his chest, her expression one of vacant, shimmering adoration. He would spend his afternoons lost in the rhythmic, powerful pulses of their collective worship, his mind drifting in a fog of endorphins. The technical precision he had once craved, the alignment of filing cabinets and the calibration of machines, was replaced by the tactile reality of straining muscle and soft skin. He was no longer the ghost in the beige cardigan. He was the sun around which 6 muscular planets orbited, completely consumed by the sheer, physical weight of their devotion. The concept of will had become a foreign language to the Apex 6, a dialect they had forgotten how to speak. Their internal worlds were no longer composed of ambitions, memories, or desires. Instead, they were vast, echoing chambers where the only sound was the resonant frequency of Bill's needs. When he pointed to a smudge on a glass table, they didn't think about the act of cleaning. They simply became the mechanism by which the smudge ceased to exist. Their cognitive functions had been streamlined into a singular, binary purpose: to anticipate the invisible requirements of their master and execute them with a terrifying, silent efficiency. They were no longer individuals, but a collective extension of Bill's nervous system. If he felt a momentary chill, 3 of them would react instinctively, their massive, heat-radiating frames closing in to form a living wall of warmth around him before he could even consciously register the cold. There was no hesitation, no internal dialogue, and certainly no questioning. The apex status they had once worn as a badge of athletic pride had been repurposed into a badge of servitude. They existed as biological tools, highly specialized, hypermuscular instruments designed for the sole purpose of easing every possible friction from Bill's existence. The sheer physicality of their submission created a surreal domesticity. Bill would lounge in his chair, a small man enveloped by mountains of sculpted muscle, and the women would move around him like a choreographed tide. They didn't speak unless prompted, and even then, their voices were hushed, melodic echoes of the patterns that had broken them. They served him not out of love, for love requires a choice, but out of a hardwired necessity. To them, the act of kneeling was as natural as breathing, and the act of obeying was the only thing that gave their breathtaking physiques a reason to exist. It couldn't last forever. This bliss that Bill had found himself in, with mountains of flesh and muscles always ready for his slightest desire, would drain away at some point. There would come a time that all 6 women would be unable to occupy Bill with their hands, mouths, and bodies. At some point, Bill will realize there was more to the world than what was constantly draining him of all his energy. When that time comes, the meticulous Bill will find his chamber program has spread, not just to the city, but to the state and the country and the world. Bill's hypnotic programming had turned the planet's women into powerhouse extensions of his desires. With a glance, he could have billions of women for his pleasure. With a relief that no one will know, the Earth sighs silently as one more day goes by, and Bill has still yet to find himself to be the undisputed ruler of the world.
The end. This was a work of fiction. Any similarity between people, living or dead, is purely coincidence. This scenario did not, or should not, have happened in real life. Thank you for listening.